Hi all. This week we're talking about existing statistics research. Existing statistics are similar to secondary data, but instead of raw data, you use statistics that somebody else has already calculated. Data is usually from organizations, often government agencies, that gather the information as part of their ongoing record keeping. Such data is often more accurate than a survey doing sampling to get the same information, partly because they're often collecting all of the data, whether it's tax records or crime statistics or other sources of information. With fewer issues of sampling and response rates, you often have those less worries about the reliability of the data. Existing statistics research implies more than simply reporting that data. It requires additional analysis. It typically involves treating these statistics from different sources as variables, and then comparing those different data source variables to see if you can come to new conclusions. Often you use those different data to compute new statistics in the relationship between those two variables. For example, you can compare the racial diversity of colleges with average GPAs by college to see what is that ratio of racial diversity to average GPA. The methodology involved is generally positivist. You're testing hypotheses to build theories. You're aiming for replicability with the similar data that's available to all other researchers generally as well. So what are the research questions you'd ask with existing statistics? Rarely answers questions about attitudes or level of knowledge. It's not usually about surveys in that way. It's far more about what's been recorded as actions on results of all sorts of different government and organizational data keeping. It's often useful for comparing officially reported data to demographic characteristics. What is the sex, the age, the race, the income of groups recorded by those groups? More likely it's used for basic than applied research, although there is applied research that can use such data. It rarely evaluates individual programs or individual needs or specific interventions, but more what are the broader effects of trends of whole processes that are happening across organizations or across society. It can help predict the needs of large populations or potential success of a program in the geographic region based on the data that you have available. For example, you could compare the effectiveness of policies between large economic units, say comparing health statistics based on whether states have funding for health services or not. Or you could see how large budget cuts across different states or different countries affect economic growth. Here are some examples of research questions that are appropriate for existing statistics from your book. You can look at how has an economic downturn affected the financial stability of small cities? You look at both data on economic costs and data on their spending. What is the relationship between immigration and use of medical services? You look at population trends, such as immigration, and the use of services in those communities, and so on. So what are you looking for in a statistical source to use in existing statistics research? First of all, will it allow you to answer your research question? Will it allow you to operationalize the variables in a way that's both appropriate and valid for testing your hypotheses? Is the data from different sources, whether different cities, different countries, different organizations, comparable and compatible with each other? Was the data generally collected in the same year? Were the data collected from similar geographic locations? Was it collected at the same unit of analysis, meaning the same level, at the individual level? Was it comparing similar cities, similar counties, similar states, similar nations, and so on? How do you think about conceptualizing and operationalizing existing statistics? You have to choose statistics computed from variables that were measured in a way that's useful to your research question and hypotheses. Don't assume that different organizations, regions, or nations use the same measure. If they're calling something assault, do they mean assault in the same way in crime statistics? Some places assume that assault includes a weapon or includes violence, and some say that assault is merely a strong threat and the threat of violence. Jurisdictions define the same crimes quite differently, so you have to think about that, for example, when comparing crime rates from one state to another. And some organizations can change their own definitions of a concept over time. For example, the IRS can change what it counts as income, so comparing tax data from 70, 80 years ago to now has to be done quite carefully. So what about sampling? While you may be using all of the data from a city, a country, a nation, at times you want to draw data from representative sample. Say you're looking much more carefully at data from a specific community that's more time intensive to collect. So you'll sample a certain number of community for that deeper data analysis. You need to think about the best sampling approach. Usually randomization, taking a random set of cities within different states or across the country, and assuming that if you get deeper data from each one of them, it'll be comparable and give you insight to the nation as a whole. So how do you do data collection and analysis? You need to first, once you get that data, enter the data into statistical software to execute whether it's crosstabs or other statistical analysis. You often need to group data into categories, say children ages 0 to 18, 18 to 25, and so on, or other ways to group the data from the raw numbers you may have. One thing to be particularly careful. If you have data about a city, a county, or a nation, don't assume that's giving you information about the individuals within those units. Just because you see a trend about changes in communities, you don't know that the similar process is affecting those individuals. That's known as the ecological fallacy. For example, if you see that counties with higher rates of homelessness may have higher levels of mental illness, that doesn't necessarily prove that the homeless themselves have higher levels of mental illness, necessarily. You may assume it's true, but you can't draw that conclusion from that data. Also, think about the validity of the data when answering any research question. Is the data you're studying matching the concepts you were looking to study in the first place? How do you present the data? You want to describe your research question and literature review and any initial hypotheses. Describe the source of the statistics used, why you chose them. Did you alter or recode the data in any way to do your analysis? And then you describe the results in tables and graphs. Contrast any findings you have with previous studies. And outline any future areas of research.